Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm Carol Jenkins. I'm President and CEO of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality. And before we start, I want to thank the Harnish Foundation for sponsoring this series of town halls for us this year and next. We sincerely appreciate it. And thank you all so much for joining what we think is going to be a very exciting discussion centered on Black Women's Equal Pay Day. We have so many dedicated partner organizations who've been fighting this good fight for a very long time. And we're lucky to be able to spotlight even a few of those who've been in the trenches on this issue. And we, of course, want to recognize the leadership of Black Congresswomen in the passage of HRS 17. As you may know, the removal of the ERA time limit earlier this year. Without them, we wouldn't have gotten this far. The inequities we're talking about today are really just the tip of the iceberg for Black women, but economic equality is so fundamental to so those advocacy and educational organizations think will reconcile that gap and bring pay parity to Black women once and for all, along with equal opportunities in employment and everywhere, in the sphere of this country. But underscoring all of this, of course, is the need, as I'm sure you're expecting me to say, the need for the Equal Rights Amendment. And you'll hear about that from some of our guest speakers as well. Without equality in our Constitution, there is not full legal recourse for women, full stop. That's our bottom line. But first, I'd like to introduce remarks from Fatima Goss-Graves, President and CEO of the National Women's Law Center. Fatima has spent her career fighting to advance opportunities for women and girls, including at NWLC, working on the issues of pay equity, workplace fairness, and anti-discrimination initiatives. She's also a co-founder of the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. Fatima wanted to be here to join us today, but had a scheduling conflict. As you can imagine, all of the women who are joining us today are so busy. She is appearing by video to kick us off in this conversation.
Hi, my name is Fatima Goss-Graves, and I'm President and CEO at the National Women's Law Center, and I'm talking to you on Black Women's Equal Pay Day. This is the day in the year that Black women's wages finally catch up to the wages paid to white non-Hispanic men. Right now, when we look at our data, we know that Black women are paid 63 cents for every dollar paid to white non-Hispanic men. And what that translates to is for Black women, there is a wage gap that costs them in the short term, but really, really costs them over the course of their lives. And when we look over the last 30 years, we also know that for Black women, we have only closed the pay gap by a penny. And that should startle you enough, but I'm going to give you one more fact before I can talk to you about what I think we all need to do. And that is Black women would have to work until they are 83 years old to be paid what a white non-Hispanic man is paid by the time he reaches the age of 60. So those multiple decades of work, of labor, and that hardship on them and their families, it must be corrected. And that is going to require us shifting the culture that surrounds us. It's going to require our institutions changing, but it's also going to require a major shift in our laws and policies that govern it. And a key part of that shift is finally having the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, as a part of our foundational documents in our Constitution that guide our laws, that guide our policy, and that send a signal that Black women in this country, that all women in this country are truly equal. So on this Black Women's Equal Pay Day, I hope that you will demand from all of your leaders a law and a constitution that matches not just the reality of our lives, but the dignity of all of us in this country.
We are very happy now to have Jennifer Klein with us to join our conversation. She has so many years of experience on this issue. She is the co-chair and executive director of the White House Gender Policy Council. She was previously the chief strategy and policy officer for Time's Up, and she has written and taught extensively about domestic and global gender policy, including as an adjunct professor at the Georgetown University Center. And she worked with former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton, as we remember, to develop No Ceilings, an initiative to evaluate progress for women and girls since the 1995 Beijing Conference on Women. And you'll remember that women's rights are human rights are women's rights. Thank you, Secretary Clinton and Jen Klein for that. She also served as deputy and senior advisor in the Office of Global Women's Issues within the Office of the Secretary of the United States Department of State. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us today. This is, a momentous time. As Fatima Goss-Graves says, finally. We've been having this conversation for a few years as well. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Carol, so much for having me. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here today to mark this really important day, but also, and more importantly, for the work that you do every day to have gotten us to this place. And probably even more importantly, for the work that you'll all continue to do on all of these issues, including the ERA and including trying to actually finally realize pay equity for women, Black women in particular, but women in this country.
Right, Jen, for those who may not know the workings of the Gender Policy Council, if you could just explain to us, exactly how that works on a day-to-day basis. I know you have so much, outreach that you have to do for all of the agencies and all, but explain to us how the Policy Council works.
Yeah, thank you. So the idea of the Gender Policy Council, which is in some sense an evolution from previous initiatives that address the issues of women and girls in previous administrations, by the way, both Republican and Democratic, although obviously more closely aligned with my own values on the Democratic side, but really this has been a bipartisan effort. So in part, we're an evolution from previous efforts, and in part, we're pretty new. And so I'll just note the things that are new. The first is, and it's really all embedded in the title, the first is gender. So while we are really intent on keeping a laser focus on women and girls, because there are issues that, of course, women and girls face because they are women and girls. We're also really signaling and then living the value of focusing on gender equity more broadly. And also, and this is not embedded in the name, but absolutely embedded in the work, is also working every single day at the intersection of racial equity, gender equity, and other forms of equity as well. The second thing I would point out is that we're a policy council, and in that we are very new. Not that we don't do a huge amount of external stakeholder engagement, we do, and in fact, the executive order that creates the council builds that in. It literally requires us to do that, and as many on the call know, we're in the process of working on a gender strategy, a national gender strategy, which will guide our work and the work of the administration more broadly for the next several years. And part of that has been an extensive look or set of meetings and convenings with external stakeholders. So that's everything from the private sector to advocates and experts, to state, local, and tribal governments, to multilateral organizations and foreign governments, in service of really ensuring that we have, and girls, actually we've had an amazing, not surprisingly, again, to anyone on this call, some amazing series of meetings with girls, particularly girls of color, who, know better than really pretty much anybody what they need to be able to have equal opportunity and to succeed. Anyway, all to say that the stakeholder engagement is really built in and very much part of our DNA, but we are at BASA Policy Council and we're focused both on foreign policy and on domestic policy. So that's why we sit as a separate council, really crossing all issues. And as again, everyone on this call knows, every issue is a gender issue, every issue is a women's issue. But I would say we're particularly focused in this moment on economic security. And so that's why today's conversation is so important and timely. Secondly, on gender-based violence. Wherever it occurs, whether that's on a college campus or in the military or in a home or a community. And then the third series of issues that we're really focused on are women's health, including reproductive health rights and justice, but not only reproductive health rights and justice. And of course that, all of that understates, as I said, the full range of issues that we're working on. I also, even as those words are coming out of my mouth, of course, education is front and center, but trying to prioritize, our work so that, particularly right now, as we are trying to pass, these major pieces of legislation in the form of the infrastructure plan and Build Back Better, that we are, really using the voice of the council and through the council, the voice of women around this country to actually advance those two giant pieces of legislation.
Right. So it's a huge portfolio, but I will note that we know that the Biden-Harris administration pledged to work for equality in the workplace, for equal pay, particularly, and also part of the mission is to address particularly the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. I think that applies to us Black women, women, and the race issue as well. But what precisely can you tell us about what is in store to correct the basic problem? I know that a lot of the initiatives now, the legislation, are to make up for the discrepancy, the discrimination. But I think what we're looking for is how do we make sure that on this Equal Pay Day that Black women are able to earn enough to support their families?
Yeah, so I am not just saying this because I'm talking to Carol Jenkins and this group of people, but I will say that, sort of first and foremost, and Fatima said it already, is the ERA undergirds all of this, right? The sort of the basic commitment, the right to equality for women, particularly Black women, women of color, is at base essential. So that's, a sort of unbreakable principle. Turning to pay equity in particular, I think it's important to recognize that there are essentially three parts of the pay gap. The first is that pure outright discrimination. And, again, as everybody on this call knows and lives, that's racial discrimination on top of gender discrimination, on top of other forms, as you said, of, multiple intersecting forms of discrimination. But so first and foremost, we need to address that discrimination. Sadly, the Paycheck Fairness Act, which is an important step in that direction, did not pass the Senate this summer, but we will continue to work on that. And we will continue to work on a series of executive actions to actually address the pay discrimination that happens in workplaces, which adds up to, in part, to what we're seeing today, which is, a Black woman needs to work 20 months to earn what a white non-Hispanic man makes in the previous year. But addressing discrimination alone is not going to do it. And it's always really important to me to point out really two other facets which add up to this pay gap. And as Fatima said, this pay gap, not only a year by year, job to job comparison, but over the course of a woman's lifetime, and how that affects, the ability to retire, the ability to own a home, the ability to support your family. Those other two factors are, the first is the jobs women do, right? So So on the one hand, women are often in jobs, Black women in particular, are often in jobs that pay less, right? The jobs that women do are often paid less, whether that's you're a home health worker,
Right.
you're a child care provider, you're a teacher, you're a nurse, right? There are like, we've now lived it, right? The
Or
world sees how essential
essential
these
care
jobs
workers,
are,
right?
and they are often held by women
Right.
of color, and they are often paid less. And at the same time, so women are paid less in the jobs they do. And the second thing is that they those jobs need to be valued, and we need to pay women adequately and ensure that those jobs are jobs with dignity, with adequate wages, et cetera. And then the last thing I will say about the pay gap is this sort of third category, which is caregiving. Right? What happens? Women bear a disproportionate share of the caregiving. And by the way, this is true in the US, and this is true in literally every country in the world. And as a result, we are in and out of the workforce either intermittently over the course of the life of a woman's career. We work less. We're often the one who has to leave a job. Again, we saw this in the pandemic. You know, when kids were home, when you had a sick relative, an elderly parent, who is the person who is actually leaving their job? And, you know, as always, this is particularly true of Black women, who are often either the sole or the primary breadwinner in their family. So those three factors together are the things that we need to address. And happy to talk in detail about what's in Build Back Better, but what it is essentially a way to address really those two other factors, you know, to ensure that people are paid adequately in these care jobs, to ensure that we have finally in this country a caregiving system that actually supports women and their families, to ensure that costs are lowered for families, whether those are healthcare costs, prescription drug costs, or care costs. All of those things are built into this really important bill.
Right. And so you see, I hope, progress in a way of fixing that, because it hasn't improved for over a 30-year period. I think if we're generous and say that it's gotten better by 3 cents, 3 pennies for Black women, you know, that's saying a lot. In terms of your timeline of what you think can be done for Black women, particularly, and this pay discrepancy.
Well, I think we have to move on a number of fronts at the same time. So, you know, number one is, as I said, you know, paycheck fairness, which is a very important down payment, didn't pass. We need to keep pressing on that. We need to keep pressing on the ERA, obviously. There are things that we can do by executive action, which we are working on to actually just address that, like pure discrimination that I talked about earlier. And at the same time, you know, what you will see over the next several weeks, 6-ish weeks, is, you know, you're seeing it, and we need all of you, is a concerted effort to pass this reconciliation bill, which has so many of the things built in. You know, I didn't even mention, but it also has built in training so that women can take on good jobs, right? What I did talk about was how people are underpaid in the jobs they do. We're also not doing a great job in this country of making sure that women have access to jobs that pay well in other fields. So whether that's STEM, which is sort of the one that historically people talk about, or manufacturing, you know, we've got a climate package which has good green jobs. What are we doing to make sure that women have access to those jobs? Women are trained for those jobs. There's no reason we can't do those jobs, Black women in particular. So again, there's all of this needs to happen, I really think, at the same time. And the tremendous energy that you know we all need together is to get this reconciliation package over the finish line in the weeks to come.
Well, great. Well, Jennifer Klein, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. I hope you'll come back and give us an update in 8 weeks and periodically, so we can keep track of this, because it's enough is enough. From our perspective of this discrepancy, we can't. And you know, the coalition staff knows that every year at this time I get extremely agitated, because it's always the same story. But Jennifer Klein, thank you for your work, and and everything that you're, doing at the White House to make a difference here.
Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing.
Thanks so much, Jen. We will see you soon, I hope.
See you soon.
And now we have recorded remarks from Representative Brenda Lawrence of Michigan, who is second vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations. Representative Lawrence.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, and I proudly represent Michigan's 14th Congressional District. I have the distinct honor of serving as the second vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I am the co-chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus. I want to thank the Equal Rights Amendment Coalition for inviting me to speak at your town hall and for all the work that you do to champion ERA. Today, August the 3rd, is Black Women's Equal Pay Day, the day that marks the 7 extra months it takes for Black women to earn what their white counterparts did the previous year. Make no mistake, Equal Pay Day is not a celebration. It's a day to shine a spotlight on the economic injustice. Imagine what we could do if we had an extra 7 months of income each year. The wage gap for Black women compared to white men is 63 cents to every dollar, and it's not just about individual paychecks. Over the course of the average Black woman's career, this lost income adds up to almost $1 million compared to their white male co-workers. In Congress, I'm working to right this wrong. In March, the House passed the Equal Rights Amendment resolution and sent a strong message that equality does not have a deadline. For far too long, women in the United States have faced sex discrimination in employment, in healthcare, and in education. And we see it all over this country and society. And our vote earlier this year was a huge step toward ratifying the ERA, ensuring that men and women are treated equally under the law, and eliminating the wage gap for Black women and all women of color. So today, let's recommit ourselves to the fight for racial and economic justice, and let's continue to build a country that works for all Americans, and it works for men and women equally. Thank you.
And our sincere thanks to Congresswoman Lawrence. Now I'd like to introduce the speakers for our collaborative discussion on Black Women's Equal Pay Day. I so admire all of the women you're about to meet if you don't know them already. Amy Allison is founder and president of Women of Color, reaching a quarter of the American population. A Democratic innovator and visionary, Amy leads national efforts to build inclusive, multiracial coalitions led by women of color. And she advocates, of course, for racial, economic, and gender justice. Monifa Bandele is the COO of Time's Up, where she leads operations, culture change, and policy campaigns that work to achieve the organization's strategic goal to ensure safe, fair, and dignified workplaces for women. In addition, she sits on the policy table leadership team for the Movement for Black Lives and the steering committee for Communities United for Police Reform. Monifa previously served as senior vice president and chief equity and partnerships officer at Moms Rising, which fights for economic security and justice for moms, women, and for families. Melanie Campbell, I'm sure you've seen her in the news lately, is president and CEO of the National Coalition on Black civic participation and convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. Melanie is recognized as one of the hardest working servant leaders in today's civil rights, women's rights, and social justice movements, voting rights, of course. And she recently celebrated 25 years of service with the National Coalition and has served as an advisor to United States presidents, congressional members, corporate, labor, nonprofit executives, philanthropists, faith leaders, and she is on the advisory council of the ERA Coalition Fund for Women's Equality as well. So she advises us, and we are, so thrilled to have her there. And next we have Beverly Smith, is the national president and CEO for Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, one of the nation's largest female-owned and operated public service nonprofits. Beverly currently serves as a member of the board of directors for the National Council of Negro Women and the Delta Research and Education Fund. And so I just want to say, you have on this panel some of my favorite people in the universe, hardworking Black women who have centered Black women in their work. And on this day, when we are complaining loudly and vociferously about the discrimination and the discrepancy in what we earn and have earned and cannot seem to crack, that solid wall, I am thrilled to have them here. I'd like each of them to take, just a brief time to set up their take on this, which includes, what we're going to do about this. So let's start with Amy. Amy, thanks for being here.
And thank you, Carol. I really appreciate the work that you are doing tirelessly and for so long, and along with the ERA Coalition. I'm so honored to be here with the panel. 10 years ago, I worked for the San Francisco Department on the Status of Women, the only municipal department in the country to focus on internationally recognized standards for justice and gender justice. And yet the city of San Francisco, in recognizing Equal Pay Day, normalized it on white women's economic experience. There wasn't 10 years ago a recognition that Black women, as well as Asian American and Latinas, have a different day because we suffer more, we have faced more injustice. Now San Francisco has a Black woman mayor, and just like the rest of the country, and thanks to the work of people on this panel, the recognition is different. Along with some of the really important changes that we heard from Jen Klein coming out of the White House, we have an incredible opportunity to lift the floor for Black women in the industries and the jobs that we find ourselves in caregiving, in restaurant server work, and that is to raise the minimum wage to $15. And that would affect Black women in places like Louisiana, where the minimum wage for someone who works in a restaurant is $2.13, where people are dependent on tips. So what I think we have with the Black women and other women of color that are in Congress, along with those of us who are activists, is a real opportunity to change the reality for Black women who work to be paid what we're worth. And I think that the opportunity this year is to raise the floor. We can look at higher, like white collar jobs. We can look at government standards. We can look at other things. But the thing that would make, deal with the poverty and the pain that we're currently feeling in a lot of these jobs would be addressed directly by raising the minimum wage. So I'm hoping that's a part of what we are able to accomplish together to start closing that that wealth gap that we've been talking about.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I am going to break order, if I may, our panelists, because we do believe that Chairwoman Waters has joined us. We understand she's sitting at her desk, having made time for us, and has, as you might expect, a back-to-back schedule. We're excited to introduce Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Chairwoman of the House Committee on Financial Services, considered by many, including those of us here, to be one of the most powerful women in U.S. politics today and for many years. She has gained a reputation as a fearless and outspoken advocate for women, children, people of color, the poor, veterans, and seniors, and has been dubbed Auntie Maxine, those of us who call her that, by millennials who appreciate, well, not exactly a millennial, who appreciate her advocacy and understanding of the issues important to them. Chairwoman Waters made history as the first woman and first African-American chair of this powerful House Financial Services Committee. And I do want to say that Bettina Hager, our DC director, and Jennifer Tucker, our policy analyst Chairwoman Waters, were at your very first minute in office. We were in the room when you took the gavel. And so we always talk about that day and say how fantastic and celebratory that was. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so very much for having me today. This is an important day. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it with you and for organizing this effort for us to not only recommit, but to remind people of the struggle that we continue to have for equal pay, for equal work, and for Black women who are at the bottom of the ladder. Thank you for that kind introduction. And of course, I'd like to thank ERA Coalition President Cleo Carroll Jenkins, the Board of Directors and ERA Coalition staff for the invitation to speak with you all. And again, I'm more than delighted to be part of today's event. As you all know so very well, we've been fighting this fight for equal pay and equal treatment for decades. I, of course, had the wonderful experience of being at the height of the women's movement. And I work closely with women's rights activists, including ERA Coalition Board member Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, Patsy Mink, Coretta Scott King, among all those others, to create a national policy agenda for women at the National Women's Conference way back in 1977. We wanted to build support and solidarity for issues most affecting us, including equal pay. And I was there, and it was one of the most defining moments of my life to be there with women from all over the country, where we were basically saying to President Carter that we needed to have a women's commission to give them input, certainly on women's issues, and to help them to understand what the administration could be. I was there to make sure that issues disproportionately affecting Black women were respected, and that we could create our own agenda that was incorporated into our larger platform. Today, as the first African American and the first woman to ever chair the Financial Services Committee, I've taken much of the same approach. As chairwoman of the committee, I created Congress's first ever subcommittee on diversity and inclusion so that we can better examine and address the systemic economic exclusion of vulnerable communities, including and especially Black women. And as I was then, I'm proud to work alongside other women, working to address the economic issues disproportionately affecting Black women, including many of my colleagues in the House of Representatives. You have already, I believe, heard from or will hear from Representatives Lee, Spear, and Lawrence, as well as Congresswoman Maloney, who serves with me on the Financial Services Committee. So you've heard just how serious they are about addressing this pay gap. I'd also like to take this time to thank Congresswoman Alma Adams, who also serves on the Financial Services Committee, for her work to introduce a resolution this year to recognize Black Women's Equal Pay Day, which I have co-sponsored. Recognizing Black Women's Equal Pay Day and addressing discriminatory economic policies is a matter of economic, gender, and racial justice, pure and simple. We continue to need the Equal Rights Amendment to help us root out systemic discrimination. And I'm pleased that last year we moved closer than ever before to making it a constitutional amendment when the House removed the time limit on the ratification process. The pay gap has been especially devastating during this pandemic, as millions of families have been struggling to keep food on the table, their children in school, and roofs over their heads. The gender pay gap, compounded with the racial wage gap, has made it even more difficult for Black women who disproportionately serve as caretakers and the breadwinners of their households to take care of major financial responsibilities, including housing and childcare. So I'm pleased that as part of the American Rescue Plan, we increased and expanded the child tax credit. Eligible families are already begun receiving direct payments for children ages 17 and under. So I intend to keep fighting until we eliminate child poverty completely, but this tremendous progress for women and their families, as it will slash the child poverty rate. Between the December relief package and the American Rescue Plan, Democrats in Congress also secured $46.6 billion in emergency rental assistance. Right now, I'm very concerned about the federal eviction moratorium, which expired this last weekend. As of last month, more than 11 million renters were behind on their rental payments. The thought of families across the country being put out on the street along with their belongings and furnishing, children having to change schools, and homelessness exploding because we could not extend the moratorium until they could receive relief is shameful. Last week, I swiftly introduced a bill entitled the Protecting Renters from Evictions Act to extend the eviction moratorium and keep families in their homes through the end of this year. We already know that Black, brown, and low-income communities are some of the hardest hit by the pandemic and threats of eviction. This is a national emergency, and I don't think it's too much to ask for us as public service in the federal government to support these families, including hundreds of thousands of Black women-led households, especially as a number of Delta variant cases in surges. So we think about Black Women's Equal Pay Day this year. I urge you to think about all the ways that Black women are affected. Then what you think about issues such as healthcare, childcare, and housing. You think about how the pay gap further exacerbates Black women's financial stability. We must do more to protect Black women, to invest in Black women, and to make sure our policies improve Black women's economic outcomes. So I'm encouraged by all of your efforts, and I appreciate all of your work to ensure gender equity for all women. And just a little bit of something before I close. Whenever I walk past a construction site, whenever I walk past any job that was, historically considered men's work, I think about the work that the women's rights movement did to open up these opportunities for women to have access to jobs that pay good money. We were relegated to the lowest paying jobs, and as single mothers, oftentimes, of course, we were living from payday to payday, and as my grandmother would say, robbing Peter to pay Paul. We got to keep up the work of the women's movement, and we've got to focus on Black women and women of color who are absolutely at the greatest risk because we still are making less than everybody else. And we still are raising these families. We're still trying to get into jobs that have been traditionally closed off. And so thank you. Thank you for organizing. Thank you for focusing. And thank you for having me on today. I appreciate you very much.
Chairwoman Waters, we cannot, I wish you could hear all of our, clapping for the work that you've done. And we've been following what you've been doing on the eviction front. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure that you have someone to take to school immediately after this town hall. But I do want to ask you one last question, and that's about your optimism about our being able to, at long last, do something about this, because it's a yearly conversation. We keep repeating ourselves and we keep saying something must be done. Do you have optimism that this time around that there's anything that you see that can change this? We already know it could take a century, if we move at the same pace that we have been moving, 100 years, for true equality for Black women.
You're absolutely right to think about how long is this going to take. But listen, we elected Biden and Harris, and they have said in no uncertain terms that they were about justice and they were about equality. And so I expect this administration to rise to the level that they are going to provide leadership and they're going to listen to us. And I want to tell you that while I have great expectations, I'm not letting anybody off the hook. Sometimes we have to get a little bit forceful and we have to say, don't forget the promises. Don't forget the representations that you made. Black women are dependent upon in the Democratic Party, and we're the highest voters in the Democratic Party. We're there, and more than ever, we're organizing and we're doing the get out the vote work, and we're making things happen for Democrats. And so, in simple terms, even if you don't have the ability to see this as a moral issue, you owe us. It's payday time. We want our payday. Thank you very much.
Whoa, and thank you very much, Chairwoman Waters. Thank you for dropping into our town hall. Oh my goodness. Okay, thank you for that. I think we interrupted Monifa going alphabetically through our panel. Sorry about that. Monifa, your thoughts on where we are and what can be done.
Listen, any day that I can be interrupted by our champion, our leader, in Congress, in the streets, you know, wherever she is, I welcome it, because I just want to keep going on that thread. We're not going to let anyone off the hook. We will not go back. We will not let the pandemic be an excuse. We won't let any of these, like, we're doing what we can. It's a slow process. Black women have been on the front lines, not only as essential workers during this time of a global health crisis, but also just in general, you know, on the forefront of saving democracy, on the forefront of saving our education systems, you know, on the forefront, going all the way back to abolition. So we refuse to continue to be paid less for what's actually more work, which is a lot of times better work, which is usually double the work, right? As our elders have always taught us, we're running twice as fast and fighting twice as hard. So I'm fired up from being like interrupted. I think it was a blessing. But one of the things I wanted to say really quickly is it's not just an economic hit when Black women are paid less for the same work. It impacts our health. It impacts the health and safety of our families. It impacts the abilities that we have for our educational aspirations, as well as the aspirations of our children. So let's not just look at these numbers. You know, when we look at whether it's 66 cents or for Black mothers, the 52 cents, those dollars and cents impact us in real ways. It actually shorten our lifespans and also, you know, threatens the safety of our families. So that's why we're adamant here. That's why there are so many Black women here on this winning team to fight for equal pay, because we know it's connected to so much else that we need for our families and communities.
Great, thank you, Monifa. Melanie.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Congresswoman, our fearless leader, Maxine Waters. I could listen to you all day, and my sisters, but I could listen to you all day. Thank you for just reminding us of our power, right? And that we have to demand what we want. And when I think about it, just listening to all that we've been fighting for, and you say 2 or 3 cents, you say at best, Carol, right? If ever there was a time for us to fully own our power, it's now. It's not later. You know, we fought and went out there and voted, and we need to be very unapologetic about what we want. The other thing that I thought about when we were talking about just the jobs that we hold and the things that are connected to why is it that we have the situation that we find ourselves in. So I saw my sister on here from Clue. I think about the connectedness of all these things that relate to that. And of course, because we're fighting right now for our voting rights, right? We need the PRO Act. We need to be able to, because when you think about, well, how did we end up where we do have some good numbers to look at? We look at middle class jobs. Well, that was from the public sector jobs. And the attack on labor is a relation to, in my opinion, how we look at how we end up in the situation that we find ourselves. We think about paid family leave. There's so many things that we voted for that are related to how we look at that number. And so this is the time. I don't think there's, if ever there was a time for us to just really corral and make demands. And yes, we know that not all is easy, but when has it ever been easy for Black women for Black folks, and period, but for Black women, we've had to carry what we've had to carry. So I'm ready, Carol, to just continue to push and push hard for what we want from our friends, right? We know Congresswoman Maxine and CBC sisters and brothers are fighting for us, but we need some of our other friends to really fight for us and not have us to say that we have to continue to wait. Because we don't need to wait 30 more years for there to be equal pay, equal rights for women. And so I think now is the time. And so just ready to just keep fighting for what we want and what we deserve.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melanie. And thank you for being willing to go to jail for it as well. We appreciate that. We see it and we appreciate it. Beverly.
Yes, ma'am.
Your thoughts on where we are, what you've heard today, and solutions for this?
Thank you, Carol. And I appreciate the fact that the ERA is doing what they're doing. Your work is always so outstanding. And you know, just to be on the same platform as Congresswoman Maxine Waters is clearly an honor. Now, I have to tell you, as an organization representing over 350,000 initiated women, clearly this is something that's on our radar. To be perfectly clear, when you look at the statistics, the wage gap for women, particularly for Black women, is, in my mind, more like a wide chasm that can't be filled unless significant change happens. Listen to the numbers. 4 million family households in the United States are headed by Black women, with almost 80% of Black mothers being the key breadwinners for their families. That's nearly 1 in 4 of those households living below the poverty line. You know what this means? 900,000 families are headed by Black women who rely heavily on their wages to make ends meet and to meet this gap. They're living in poverty, and the number is staggering. But you know, I think of it this way: the positive impact in closing this gap, this chasm in our economic and our financial system can't be ignored any further. If we have a boost in the economy and increase the incomes that will be spent on needed products and services in a time when it's needed the most, it's hard to believe that we could actually pass up this win-win for women and for the business community. Closing that gap, increasing those incomes, mean there's money in the income stream and the financial stream for products, services, education. The time is now. It's a time when we need it the most. It's a time for all of us to work collaboratively to push to make sure this closes. You look at the numbers, you understand the impact, the thought of making our healthcare changes, education changes, Black women being able to do more as they do more with less now. Imagine what they could do more if there was more available to them. We can't help but win this. The country can't help but win this. We just need to make sure that people understand that and we all collaboratively work together on it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all 4 of you. Extraordinary brains and power put to this issue. I'd like now to move to a recorded message from Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who has been a longtime supporter of the ERA. She's from California's 13th district. She currently serves on the Budget Committee and the Powerful Appropriations Committee, which oversees all federal government spending. And Congresswoman Lee is the only African-American woman in Democratic leadership, serving as co-chair of the Policy and Steering Committee. A message she sent to us.
Thank you, Carol, for that kind introduction and for inviting me to speak with you today. Now, nearly 100 years ago, when the Equal Rights Amendment was drafted, it stated that equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged. However, today we still see the impacts of systemic racism and sexism in our workplaces. This is inexcusable, especially because the ERA, that's Equal Rights Amendment, did pass through Congress and was not implemented solely because of an arbitrary ratification deadline. Passing the amendment would reaffirm equality for all women, and it would create a critical legal tool to combat the discrimination women face each and every single day, especially women of color. Although the wage gap has narrowed since the passing of the Equal Pay Act in 1963, women of color continue to experience decreased wages on many fronts. Black women make up 10% of the low-wage workforce, or jobs that typically pay less than $11 an hour, or about $22,880 annually, while they make up just 6.2% of the overall workforce. It is way past time for us to take a stand against sexism and racism within our industries. This pandemic has created more inequities for women everywhere and displays most poignantly why we need the Equal Rights Amendment. Whether it's for pay discrimination, pregnancy discrimination, or sexual and domestic violence, the Equal Rights Amendment will be a monumental step in combating discrimination in the workplace. Let's keep up the fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lee. We really truly appreciate your support through many years and many events. And through such hard work and positive work. We're going to go back to our panel, but I do want to alert the viewing audience that we're going to go a little bit long. If you could stay with us, please do. If not, we will have the complete recording of this available to everyone by Thursday. I believe it'll be up on our site and available. So stay with us if you can. I want to go back to Amy and Bev and Melanie and Manifa to ask about steps, in the next few weeks, months, so that next year, when we come around to this, August date again, we don't have to, wring our hands and say we haven't made any progress. Who wants to start with some idea of concrete steps we can take? Amy, I know that you are, very results oriented. You're great at organizing people. And so what do we do so that next year we have a different picture to look at, something more to talk about than 63 cents?
Yeah, all these women are results oriented. I would just say part of the reason that this event is so critical right now is for us to adopt a common strategy and agenda for Black women to close the wage gap. And it's not going to be one thing. Like, I am an advocate of raising the floor with the minimum wage because I know what an impact it'll have on, everyday Black women who are working in jobs that are sub minimum wage, or that minimum wage, raising the minimum wage would lift them and their families out of poverty. So I'm an advocate of getting that done this year. And I think we also have to have, when we talk about what's doable, there was a procedural block for us to actually get minimum wage in the rescue plan. And we have to put on the pressure, kind of, like our Congresswoman Waters said, we cannot accept excuses or delays for doing things like including minimum wage in this really, really critical set of solutions. So I think that's what we get done. I think that's step one. If we do that this year, and minimum wage raises for millions and millions of Black women and other women of color, people have an opportunity then to look at a wage gap that's not as big. And it's going to take that plus a bunch of other things that a lot of the other panelists are advocating for us to get all that done. The final thing I will say is we have to continue to support our bold and courageous elected leadership who will not be cowed and will not turn their back on the fact that we need to close this gap in order to achieve economic and racial justice.
Great. See, I said results, but Bev, are you?
Yeah. If I can piggyback on what Amy said, that's so critically important. The Black women's organizations have come together to form a coalition called United Women for Reform. That we represent 5 million voices that vote. And I think we have to continue. We worked hard when the elections happened. We're working hard on voter suppression. I think this is a critical issue that all of us have in common. And we have to find ways to fight this together. I think that coalition, as she says, matters in terms of picking up the points that are most significant that we have to work on. And if we do that, and we will do that, I'm certain Melanie's in that coalition with me, we will continue to work to fight and make sure the voice is loud for what we need. We have to make sure that we contact Congress people, that they know how many voices are being represented, that they know that this could make economically for the country. I just don't think they understand. We spend money. We have to at every level to take care of the children and education and those kinds of things. The impact of an increased revenue stream matters, and that can happen. I realize they think they're giving money away, but they're actually getting more money back. And understanding the economics of it should be something that is simple to them. The other thing that I'll say, and I push this all the time, and I think everybody who knows me know that, we need a seat at the table. We have people elected at every level of government now. We need to continue to make sure that we elect people, that women take those seats and continue to take those seats and continue to use the strength they have by using the power of their voice and the power of their economy and the community in terms of service, but making sure that voice is sitting at a place where you make difference, not only a seat where congressional leadership matters and voting matters, but in businesses, on corporate boards, on making sure that we're in power in organizations that make a decision on what those wages are going to be. That's the other place we need to make sure our voice is loud and we are heard strongly.
Great, Melanie.
Well, and I can't get away from this because we're all living it. But I think if we don't have our federal voting rights protected,
right,
our agenda is in real trouble. And so I think in the short run, in the very, very short run, we better get federal voting rights protections, especially what's happening in the states. Sarah Smith down in Georgia just keeps being the gift that keeps on giving to understand when you have the ability for one party rule for an autocracy versus a democracy, our whole agenda is in trouble. Right. And so I think for the short run, we need all the voices out here pushing for us to get these bills passed that are one that's sitting there for the people at, and the other being formulated in the House, which is the John Lewis bill. And I believe, I'm not speaking for anybody on here, that they need to end the filibuster or do something with it so that our voting rights are not in peril. So when it comes to Black women and the role we play, people say how we are the secret sauce, we are all of these things. But if our voting rights are not protected, our ability, not just how we vote, but the fact that in Georgia, they're in Fulton County, which is one of the largest counties, when it comes to African Americans, they can take control of the local board of elections. That's not 2022. That's 2021. There's a mayor's race. The last I checked, it sits in Fulton County. So we have an existential threat that impacts all of what we're talking about here. And so that's what I would add. Just everybody raise your voices. If you have not, don't look the other way and think everybody's handling it, because it's not handled. That's why we're going to such measures and working with the National Council of Legal Women and Delta Sigma Theta and everybody that can and will speak up. They're going home next week in the Senate. Maybe not. Some folks are out there still protesting to get them to stay a while. But voting rights is just essential to our women's agenda and our Black women's agenda and our women of color agenda.
Great, thank you all. We have another video that we want to play from Congresswoman Jackie Speier. She, of course, the Me Too movement, she shared her own experience of misconduct when she was a congressional aide, and her legislation, the Me Too Congress Act, became the basis for the Bipartisan Congressional Accountability Act, Reform Act, that was signed into law in December of 2018. And of course, she was the lead sponsor of HJ Res 17, a bill to remove the time limit from the ERA. And so we're thrilled to have Congresswoman Speier.
Good afternoon, and thanks to the ERA Coalition for hosting this town hall today. We are here to recognize Black women's equal pay day, or as I like to put it, unequal pay day. We've all heard the statistics. Black women are paid 63 cents on the dollar compared to white men. And if current trends continue, it'll take Black women a century, yes, a century, to achieve equal pay. Behind those numbers are the families losing nearly $1 million over the course of a Black woman's career, money that could go towards education, housing, childcare, food, or retirement savings. Put simply, it's disgraceful, it's unjust, and it has to be rectified. That starts with the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. We know that pay inequality is rooted in sex discrimination. In fact, 39% of the pay gap may be attributed to discrimination alone. We need to look no further than Tracy Rexroth, who was paid $17,000 less than her male colleague at the Arizona Department of Education because they decided to base her wages on her previous salary rather than the job at hand. Shockingly, a federal district court ruled that unequal starting salaries based on previous pay doesn't violate the Equal Pay Act. For women across America, a discriminatory salary stays with them like an anchor, dragging them and their families down for the rest of their lives. But if we had the ERA, the outcome would be different. Other women are not only making less for equal work, they're being retaliated against if they dare to compare salaries with coworkers. And we know the pay gap doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's the result of our abject failure as a society to prioritize the care economy, including childcare and paid leave. For too long, we've left women, and particularly Black women, to fend for themselves when they're raising a family, forcing them to leave the workforce and take a hit to their earning power. Enough is enough. The Equal Rights Amendment will finally guarantee protections against sex discrimination in the Constitution, where it belongs. It brings us into the 21st century, along with 85% of the United Nations member states that explicitly guarantee gender equality in their constitutions. And it's the right thing to do. We've already passed my bipartisan resolution in the House to remove the arbitrary time limit for ratification. I know you'll join me to keep fighting to get the Senate to act. Thank you.
And thank you, Congresswoman Spear. So from our panel, one last quick marching orders. Melanie, if you could give, just steps to take. One last word to our audience.
Get it involved in the Equal Rights Amendment fight, right? Get involved in the ERA coalition, and just stay involved. Just stay involved. And everyone listening, we all have a voice, and if we raise those voices loud enough and keep pushing and electing the people who listen to us, then I think we'll get there. We'll move the ball.
Great. Beverly? Yeah.
I think what I'd say to every woman out there, don't underestimate the power of your individual voice. Be your authentic self and speak up for yourself, while we all are going to try to come together to speak out for each other, and we must do that. Do not underestimate the power that you as an individual have for your family and for your community.
Thank you. And Amy?
I just want to say how proud I am to be among such amazing Black women who are truly leading the country into the new era. In this next year, we are facing, as Melanie said, existential threats that Black women are uniquely qualified and prepared to address, not to do anything alone, but to do things together. And the time has never been more right to adopt a whole slew of solutions to address the pain and suffering that ourselves and our communities have been facing for generations. And I want to encourage everyone on here to recognize this moment. We have people in the White House, people in Congress, we have people in the communities and people across different regions who are ready to roll. So wherever you live, start putting plans in place to take advantage of the momentum that we currently have. And we can't assume that we're always going to have it, but this is the time to get structural, long-term solutions in place. And so I just really thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here today. And we have, for closing remarks, Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney, who was actually one of the founders of the ERA Coalition, has worked on the Equal Rights Amendment for most of her congressional life. And she has introduced legislation that would amend this Constitution over and over again since the 105th Congress, and now we're at 117. But a dear friend of the coalition, Chairwoman of the Oversight and Reform Committee in the United States Congress, Carolyn Maloney.
It is always such a pleasure to be with the ERA Coalition. Thank you for inviting me to briefly address Black Women's Equal Pay Day. As we know, it is not a celebration. Nothing could demonstrate the fact that women still lack fundamental equality in this country more than the fact that it takes 7 extra months for Black women to earn what their white male counterparts did the previous year. This is a national scandal. John F. Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act into law in 1963, and here we are almost 60 years later, and the wage gap persists. Unequal pay still exists for all women to this day, and it's much worse for women of color. Today, the wage gap for Black women compared to white men is 63 cents to every dollar. Over the course of the average Black woman's career, that lost income adds up to almost $1 million compared to their white male counterparts. Unequal pay also has a generational impact. Lower earnings for Black women accumulate over time and impact the health and livelihood of generations of families and communities. We won't be able to fully enforce the Equal Pay Act or any other law promoting gender equity until we have secured the constitutional right to gender equality. We need to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. Finally, we cannot address the wage gap for Black women without also addressing the systemic racism that compounds with gender discrimination to create this profound inequality. I want to thank the Coalition, and particularly Carol Jenkins, for your tireless work to raise the profile of one of our most important goals, the Equal Rights Amendment. Finally, seeing it integrated into the Constitution is worth all our time, talents, and efforts. I deeply appreciate your work and vow to do my part to make equality a reality, including achieving equal pay. Thank you so much.
And thanks so much to Chairwoman Maloney and to our panelists who are just sensational. We will have this up on our website, the recording, and we'll share widely with you and take the steps that have been suggested so generously from our participants. We want to thank you for joining us, who are watching and who put comments in the chat and who support our work. You can find out more about us at eracoalition.org or Fund for Women's Equality.org. We have the sister organizations, one educational and one doing the work on Capitol Hill. So we believe that part of the solution to this, of course, is the Equal Rights Amendment, the fundamental underpinning of recognition that we exist and are owed what others in this country have enjoyed for many years. So let's make sure that it doesn't take us a century as predicted now, if things go the way they are going now. Let's convene here again next year and let's document our progress. Let's hit the streets. Let's understand that voting is essential. And as Melanie and Beverly and Amy and Monifa have said, if you don't have that, we really don't have anything else. So however we can participate in that over the next year, we should do. Thanks everybody for joining us. We've got Instagrams coming up, more events. We're doing a screening of the Pauli Murray film in September. So please join us for that. We'll make sure that you get notified about all the things that we're planning. Have a great day.